What happens when you take one of literature's most cheerful orphans and finally let her be as hurt as she always seemed to be underneath all that imagination? Today, we're talking about Anne with an E, and why modernizing Anne Shirley's story didn't betray L.M. Montgomery's character. It gave her the ending she always deserved. Every adaptation before this one treated Avonlea like a postcard. Sun-soaked fields, gentle misunderstandings, a Marilla who softens right on schedule. Anne with an E opened with something colder, an orphanage, a frightened girl, and a color palette that looked more like a Bronte novel than a children's classic. Longtime fans noticed immediately, and a lot of them pushed back hard. Some felt the show was rewriting Anne into a girl they didn't recognize, but that discomfort says something important. We had gotten so used to a softened, decorative Anne that giving her real damage felt like a betrayal, when really, it was just honesty catching up to a story that had always been about survival. This is the version of Anne who says the thing out loud. When she insists girls can do anything a boy can do, and more, it's not subtle, and it's not supposed to be. This Anne wants school, wants a future as a writer, wants to be taken seriously by people who'd rather she just learn to keep house. The show lets her be loud about wanting those things, instead of letting her ambition live quietly between the lines, the way period dramas usually ask their heroines to behave. She doesn't make herself smaller to be liked. She just keeps talking until the room adjusts to her instead of the other way around. And honestly, that's the most Anne thing she could possibly do. Older adaptations treated Anne's backstory as a sad little prologue you get through before the fun starts. This version refuses to do that. Anne's abuse and neglect show up in her body, her temper, her need to narrate her own life because no one ever did it for her. Even Matthew gets pulled into this honesty. Where past versions kept his hardships gentle, this Matthew faces the real possibility of losing the farm and the despair that comes with it, undisguised. It's a harder watch, and it's also a more honest one, because kids who grew up scared rarely come out of it unscathed, and pretending otherwise was never really doing Anne any favors. The women around Anne get interior lives too, not just supporting roles. Marilla's strictness gets traced back to her own buried grief and the life she didn't get to choose. Diana spends real time wrestling with what marriage is supposed to mean for a girl like her. And then there's Aunt Josephine, whose backstory the show invented almost entirely. A woman who chose a life with another woman, Gertrude, on her own terms, long before anyone would have called that choice safe. The show built her as a lesbian character, whose Netflix original storyline gave Diana a relationship to reckon with, and Anne a model of independence she'd never seen modeled before. None of these women exist, only to react to Anne. They get to want things too. This is where the show took its biggest swings. Cole Mackenzie, a character with no basis in the books at all, was created from scratch for the series, and given a coming-out story set in Canada, where being gay was still illegal. Sebastian, a Trinidadian sailor who becomes Gilbert's closest friend, opened the door to a storyline about a real historical Black community near Charlottetown that most viewers and most history classes had never heard of. Season 3 introduced Kakwit, a Mi'kmaq girl whose forced removal to a residential school confronted Avonlea's idyllic reputation directly. Not everyone thought these threads belonged in a story about a red-headed orphan from 1908. Some viewers felt the show was stacking too many issues onto one girl's coming-of-age tale. But Avonlea was never actually that white, that straight, or that simple to begin with. The show just finally let the camera turn toward the people the books left out of frame. By the time Season 3 ended on an unresolved cliffhanger for Kakwit, Anne with an E had built one of the most devoted fandoms on Netflix, and the cancellation news in late 2019 detonated it. Fans crowdfunded billboards in Toronto's Yonge Dundas Square and New York's Times Square demanding a renewal, and celebrities like Ryan Reynolds publicly called on Netflix to bring the show back. A renewal petition eventually broke Netflix's own record for the largest fan campaign the platform had ever seen. None of it brought Season 4. What it did prove is that audiences weren't tired of Anne's harder edges. They wanted more of them. Years later, people are still finding this show, still arguing about it online, still recommending it to friends who think they already know the story. That's not what happens to an adaptation adaptation that got something fundamentally wrong. So no, Anne with an E didn't ruin Anne Shirley. It just finally let her be exactly as complicated as she always was underneath the puff sleeves. This is Ladies First, watching women in movies. Here, we empower women by reviewing and discussing films that highlight their stories, struggles, and achievements. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.